includes the approach. The whole includes the time of day, and the viewer, and the momentum of architecture. So
let's take as an example the smell, because this is interesting from the viewpoint of the single detail and the entire result. Because probably most of us, she's gone, no, she's there. Because I think, at least I'm not acquainted at all, well, I've studied vision, but with smell is completely different because I cannot perceive the single component of what you create. But we can perceive, all of us can perceive, I don't know if we can share the perception and if for everyone is the same, but we can definitely perceive something which is entire here. So how would you comment on this debate about the details and the whole?
All the details are very important. I mean, it's a big formula to make the smell of Berlin. It's like 200 chemical components, and it's like 3 months work, back and forth, to measure micro units. So the details are very, very important for the outcome. Absolutely, in all aspects. But
sorry,
no.
please.
And also the details of the in the space, the smell are projected, intervolved in how the smell in the end comes out. So it's a very complex thing. Outside will smell completely different again.
I think it's in a way too simple to look at it only in terms of whether you're looking at the whole or the detail, because I think already in what you heard her say and her as well, there's a relation that's going on constantly, and it really goes back to your model, which is correct, that you're constantly finding things in the process. Where she said, for example, she made something out of Korean, I think it was, and when she was all through, in essence, she said with hardly a comment, then I just had to see what it would look like in wood. And there is always this kind of back and forth, and it is sometimes in the detail and sometimes in the whole. I remember Robert Motherwell told me one time that when he made the elegy pictures, he always would block in all the forms, and he was a very structural painter. I mean, he really had an idea of what the canvas composition was like, but he said for him, where the emotional play really happened was in filling in the edges and filling in the forms and then repainting the edges. Yes. Which is all about the detail. Yes. So,
but you know something, I get the impression from this discussion that artists and art historians and us share the same problem about the whole and the detail, and we do go back and forth. And we don't know how we go back and forth. I mean, you were very hesitant you were not quite explicit. I mean, explicit in the sense that scientists like, something very precise. But nor can science be very explicit about how you go back and forth. What I can tell you, though, is that in any of your creations, I can concentrate on a detail, or I can concentrate on the whole, but I cannot concentrate on both in the same time frame, let's say, of 50, 60 milliseconds. I have to go between one and the other. And you're absolutely right that we keep conversing in this way. And how we do that, we don't know.
I mean, to take off from what you began, can I just surely, there's one important thing. Everybody should name who he is and where he comes from, because I'm afraid that not everybody knows who he is.
Yeah.
So I know this.
I'm Jonathan Feinberg. I'm from University of Illinois in the Phillips Collection.
And I'm Jitish Kalat. I'm a Mumbai-based artist. Just taking off from the initial statement that you made, seeing as an act, as a creative act, and I just thought if we look at, necessarily the brain and the eye functioning in the world, not just vis-a-vis art, but vis-a-vis life, then perhaps seeing becomes an act of coping. And then the world not necessarily as a muse, but necessarily as a cipher, that you kind of, you're essentially having to decipher at all times.
So did you say coping?
Coping. Yes. So not necessarily, taking in something as an aesthete when you just live life, but essentially decoding a cipher. And from that perspective, I think the point that Pei was, supposedly making was not necessarily building a brick by brick module of making art, but essentially coping with the stimuli as they emerge, which is a constant act of deciphering the next stage, which could be a part of the whole, but essentially it's a two-way process of deciphering rather than essentially building. I mean, that's just a point I want to deposit.
It's rather than coming at the artwork as something as a whole before it's even made, but allowing for mystery and unraveling and disruptions and things like that, and accommodating that, and allowing for surprises and failures, and maybe shining a light on the failure, you know, not having a sense of a perfect whole at any point, for me, is important.
When you say coping, you use another word at the end. What you just remind me of the last word you said?
No, I just try to make a parallel between art and life. And if you look at essentially the world as art, it probably becomes a kind of muse, a kind of, an object of attention.
I believe, but then of course I wouldn't I, because I'm a neuroscientist. I believe that art is nothing more than an extension of the function of the brain, which is to acquire knowledge. And up to a point, I'm coming close, or at least you're coming close to me. And I think it is, the word you used was deciphering. Deciphering is acquiring knowledge. It's another term for saying acquiring knowledge. I think we perhaps, we value art, but why do we value it? It's beautiful, but also gives us knowledge. I think the man who said about the Velázquez, the Wonder Pereira, which we unfortunately are allowed to go to America, he said this alone is the truth. The rest are all paintings. This is the truth. An interesting, what is truth? Giving you knowledge. And I think art is giving knowledge.
You know, I'm sorry, did you? I don't want to interrupt. You know, it seems to me science is very good at making itself look quantitative, and the scientists have done a better job of this than the artists and the humanists. But in fact, I don't think it's actually true. And I think of some recent examples which are really striking. The work of Carl Woese is one. You know, his work. You know, who won the Crawford Prize 2 years ago, or was it 2 or 3 years ago? You know, who'd been saying for 30 years that we totally misunderstood evolution, that it doesn't go along a tree, but it goes up like this in all directions at once. It fits what the art historians have been for a long time calling postmodernism. And finally, after 30 years of treating him like a kook, they gave him a Nobel Prize, and they discovered he was right. And I think in science, string theory would be another example. But, you know, in science, you do have the same kind of orthodoxies that you have in the arts and humanities, although in the arts and humanities we have a habit of yelling at each other about in public. And in science, somebody's paying for a grant, and we're a little less able to do that. But I think that the whole creative process is really what we're talking about. I think we're talking about the same thing in science and art. Honestly, I totally agree that it's about trying to, it's about trying to discover knowledge. But it can be in the little aperçu, or it can suddenly be in the seeing a big picture.
But it is so explicit and so verbal. So verbal and explicit. This way of searching.
What is so verbal?
No, exactly. This way of searching from the art viewpoint.
Why do you say verbal?
Because, I mean, explicit, conscious, rational.
Yeah, but maybe not verbal.
Because I don't know. Because I always thought that I always looked at the creative process as completely pre-verb.
I think it is.
So exactly. So when they cannot really explain where they are going, I think, I don't know, when you think of a smell, maybe you have in your head, or at least you perceived it. So you are going to create something.
These are two different stories. One is based on memory, which is like 20 years. I lived in East Europe, Russia, and in Poland and East Berlin. And the second one is made reality. So I went to sites, I sampled with headspace, with the high-tech technology, and I tried to compare how close can I get to reality to my vision of my version based upon memory.
When she goes from the drawing, you just say, when I had this project for Venice, I wanted to do that, and then I had to deal with the space and with the fact that I couldn't put needles. So this way of approaching your idea is really so rational and so, I would say, verbal, but I don't know.
It's funny because there's almost nothing rational about
Exactly,
installing in
that's
Venice.
exactly what I thought.
But it's about. But it's interesting to accommodate contingencies, and maybe the contingencies can add a sort of richness
To
that
the work.
has not been
Exactly,
expected.
but in science, how does it work in science
May I
then?
say, first of all, I think it is really a mistake to try and verbalize too much about art.
No, exactly.
Because
This I agree.
and partly because the linguistic system is relatively as 100,000 years old, whereas the visual system is over 1 billion years old. So, I mean, the visual system can communicate things to you, which hundreds of pages of the description, and when you see someone who's with a disapproving look, you recognize it immediately. And hence the difficulty I think that artists often have, in my experience, of explaining verbally what they want to do. And I think they're right when they say, well, look, if you want to see what I do, look at my painting. And that's right, I think. A verbal is an inadequate way of approaching visual art at any rate.
Can I be difficult for a moment?
Of course.
What do you mean for a moment?
You know, it's very interesting listening to this discussion because it seems to me that the artists are talking about their work, which is always an accrual. But I'm not sure an addition to knowledge. The question that one has listening to Samir is, what is the scientific accrual that you are offering here? In other words, you know, these are, you have fine sentiments, but they're intuitive. In other words, we want to know what is the, you know, what elements here are we adding to generally bien pensant philosophical ideas about art? I mean, you come obviously as a neuroscientist, so we respect this and we respect the work on vision, but it's not very clear to me what difference your sentiments, how different your sentiments are, shall we say. Let me give you one example and then I'll let you respond. I went to a very interesting conference by some of the most distinguished philosophers in the world last week in Berlin. And it was a discussion in Berlin. And it was a discussion about phenomenology.
Does he have a name? Does he have a name, this philosopher?
Yes, John McDowell was one and Herbert Dreyfus was another. So, and the discussion obviously arose from the fact that something which we are all interested in these days. Well, there were a lot of philosophers. There was Charles Taylor, I mean, big guys. And the question was about embodiment, an issue which most of us have been in one way or another. Most of us who have worked in the field of sciences have been concerned with embodiment. And here was the central question. The central question was, Dreyfus says that I am always bodily involved in the world. So we who have worked in this field have some notion of this. And he says it's preconceptual. And McDowell is very concerned to show that even the body is already conceptual. In other words, we cannot engage in the world without a concept. So we now have the instruments. I think neuroscience has provided us with some of the instruments in order to understand these very problems. And this is why I have made it my business to be involved in some of the new discoveries of neuroscience, because one gets exasperated with distinguished philosophers talking endlessly about problems which are relatively capable of being illuminated by, I hate to say it, a few facts, some empirical data. So this is, you know, I think this is what we want from you, Semi, rather than saying, you know, the brain is, well, you said a lot of things about the relationship between detail and the whole. I mean, where is this business about the relationship in detail and the whole going, Semi?
Rather than saying what? David, rather than saying what?
Sorry.
I mean, I think that you may have misunderstood my view of neuroaesthetics. I am not there to explain beauty, nor am I there to explain art, nor am I there to explain Cézanne or any of these. On the contrary, what I want to do is to use the outputs of artists to see what experiments I can design. Now, I think it would be extremely foolish for anyone wanting to study the visual motion system in the brain, not to look at kinetic art, why did the connected artists eschew form and eschew color? Why did they do it? They did it, and the answer is that the